My name is Emily Carter. I'm 24 years old, and for 24 years, I lived in my parents' house as their servant. Every morning at 5, I woke up before the sun, not to get ready for school, not to start my day like a normal daughter, but to scrub their floors, wash their dishes, cook breakfast for the family that refused to call me their child. I wasn't allowed to sit at the dinner table. I wasn't allowed to call them mom or dad. And according to the man who raised me, I didn't even legally exist. He used to lean close and whisper the same sentence and every time I asked questions. Some children are born to be loved. Others are born to serve. For most of my life, I believed him. Until the day my brother got married. Because during the wedding photos, the bride's father looked at my face and suddenly started trembling. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Then he pulled me aside and asked a question that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Do you know who your real mother is? What happened after that question uncovered a secret buried for more than 2 decades. A secret that would bring the FBI to our door. A secret that would destroy the family that raised me. But before I tell you how it all began, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That way, if life pulls you away before the end of this story, you'll still be able to come back and find it again, along with many more powerful stories about Truth Family and the moment karma finally arrives. And while you're listening, I want you to think about something. What would you do if the people who raised you weren't actually your family at all? Because by the end of this story, you might understand exactly how that feels. We lived in a large colonial house in Westchester County, just outside New York City. From the outside, it looked like the perfect American home. Freshly cut lawns, white wooden shutters, 2 luxury cars sitting neatly in the driveway. Our neighbors were lawyers, doctors, and finance executives who commuted into Manhattan every morning. People who believed the Carter family had everything. A successful father, a stylish mother, and a handsome son with a bright future. But inside that house, there was another person, someone most people never noticed. Me. My bedroom wasn't upstairs with the rest of the family. It was in the basement, a small concrete room next to the furnace, where the air always smelled faintly of dust and oil. In the winter, it was barely warm. In the summer, it felt like breathing inside a locked garage. My bed was an old mattress on a metal frame. No decorations, no pictures, just a single lamp and a wooden dresser with a broken drawer. Every morning, my alarm rang at 5. By 5:15, I was already upstairs in the kitchen. I would start the coffee first. Harold Carter, my father, though I wasn't allowed to call him that, liked his coffee strong and black. After that came breakfast. Eggs, toast, sometimes bacon. Everything had to be ready by 7 sharp. That was when Harold would walk down the stairs with his newspaper tucked under his arm. He never greeted me. He never asked how I was doing. Most mornings, he didn't even look at my face. He simply sat down at the table and asked one question. Is breakfast ready? Yes, Mr. Carter, I would answer. That was the entire conversation. 24 years of my life, reduced to 2 sentences. Linda Carter, my mother, though again, I couldn't call her that, came down a little later. She always looked immaculate. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfume that filled the entire kitchen. She would sit beside Harold and sip her coffee while scrolling through her phone. Sometimes she would glance toward the counter where I stood. Not with warmth, not with affection, but with the same casual indifference someone might show toward a household appliance. Emily, she would say. Yes, Mrs. Carter. The eggs are overcooked. Or, you missed a spot on the counter. Or sometimes simply, try harder tomorrow. While they ate breakfast at the table, I stood beside the sink. When they finished, I cleared the plates. Only after the kitchen was empty did I eat. Usually whatever scraps were left behind. Upstairs, the second floor belonged to my older brother Daniel. Daniel Carter had the life everyone expected from the son of a successful family. His bedroom had tall windows overlooking the garden, a massive television mounted on the wall, shelves full of expensive sneakers, and a walk-in closet larger than my entire basement room. Daniel attended a private prep school that cost more per year than most people's college tuition. He drove a silver Mercedes his parents bought him for his 18th birthday. He went on ski trips to Colorado and summer vacations in the Hamptons. Meanwhile, I had never been to school, not once. Whenever neighbors asked about me, Linda had a simple explanation. "Emily is homeschooled," she would say, with a polite smile. But the truth was, no one ever taught me anything. I learned how to read from old magazines Linda threw away. I practiced math by counting grocery receipts. And the outside world existed mostly through the small television Daniel had replaced when he bought a newer one. One afternoon, when I was about 14, I asked Linda a question I had been holding inside for years. She was sitting in the living room flipping through a home decor catalog. I had just finished vacuuming the carpets. "Mrs. Carter," she didn't look up. "What is it? Why can't I sit at the table with you and Dad?" "I mean, Mr. Carter," the catalog lowered slowly. Linda looked at me as if I had just asked the most ridiculous question imaginable. "Emily," she said calmly, "you know the rules." There were 4 of them. Harold had written them on a small card years ago and taped it to the inside of my basement door. Rule number 1, you do not sit at the family table. Rule number 2, you do not call us Mom or Dad. Rule number 3, you do not leave the house without permission. Rule number 4, you do not speak to strangers about this family. I memorized those rules before I turned 8 years old. Linda tilted her head slightly as she studied my face. "Some children are born to be loved," she said quietly. "And some children are born to help others." Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed cold. "You're the second kind, Emily." Then she lifted the catalog again, ending the conversation as if it had never happened. That night, I stood in front of the small mirror in the basement bathroom. For the first time, I really looked at my reflection. My eyes were green, bright green. No one else in the Carter family had eyes like that. Harold's were brown, Linda's were brown, Daniel's were brown. My hair was darker too. My face, different somehow. I stared at that reflection for a long time, and a question formed in my mind. A quiet question I had never dared to ask before. Why didn't I look like them? At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. But years later, I would realize something strange. In 24 years of living in that house, there was not a single family photograph with me standing beside them. When my brother Daniel announced he was getting married, the entire Carter household went into celebration mode. Linda practically floated through the house for weeks. She spent hours on the phone with wedding planners, florists, and caterers. Every conversation ended with the same sentence: "This wedding must be perfect." Daniel was marrying Olivia Bennett. Olivia came from a family that wealthier than ours. Her father, Charles Bennett, owned one of the largest real estate investment firms in New York, the kind of company that owned entire office towers in Manhattan. People like the Bennetts didn't just have money, they had influence. The wedding was scheduled for early spring at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. 200 guests, a live orchestra, crystal chandeliers and white roses everywhere. The kind of wedding people talked about for years. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe something different might happen. I had spent weeks helping Linda organize invitations, sort guest lists, and coordinate deliveries. Part of me hoped maybe this time I would be included. Maybe I would sit at the table like a normal sister. Maybe Daniel would introduce me to Olivia's family. But 3 weeks before the wedding, Linda called me into the kitchen. She folded her hands on the marble counter and smiled politely. "We need to talk about your role during the ceremony." My heart lifted slightly. "Am I walking with the bridal party?" I asked. Linda laughed. Not kindly. "Oh, Emily," she said, "you won't be part of the ceremony." The words hit me like cold water. "What will I be doing?" "You'll help the catering staff," she replied casually. "Passing champagne, clearing glasses, making yourself useful." "You mean working?" "It's not working," she said sharply. "It's helping." She stepped closer and straightened the collar of my black dress. You know how awkward you can be in social situations. If you stood in front of 200 guests, people might start asking questions. What kind of questions? I asked quietly. Linda's smile tightened. Questions about why our daughter behaves like a stranger. She patted my arm gently. This is the best place for you. Behind the scenes, invisible, the rehearsal dinner was held the night before the wedding at an elegant restaurant overlooking Central Park. White tablecloths, soft piano music, champagne glasses sparkling under warm lights. Linda handed me a black dress and a white apron before we left the house. Wear this, she said. You'll blend in with the service staff. I carried a silver tray of champagne glasses through the room as guests arrived. Men in tailored suits, women wearing jewelry worth more than my entire life. No one looked twice at me. To them, I was just another server moving quietly through the crowd. Until Olivia approached. She was standing near the bar when she suddenly turned and looked at me more carefully. You're Emily Wright, she asked. Her voice was warm, friendly. I nearly dropped the tray. Yes, ma'am. Why are you working tonight? She asked, confused. Aren't you Daniel's sister? Before I could answer, Linda appeared beside us, like she had been waiting. Oh, Emily insisted on helping, she said quickly, with a light laugh. She's always preferred staying busy rather than sitting around. Olivia frowned slightly, but nodded politely. Then she returned to her guests. I resumed walking through the room, trying to keep my hands steady. That's when I noticed him. Charles Bennett, Olivia's father. He was standing near the large windows overlooking the park. Tall, distinguished, silver hair neatly combed back. But he wasn't looking at the skyline. He was looking at me, not casually, not politely. He was staring, as if he were studying my face. I turned away quickly and continued serving drinks. A few minutes later, I felt someone step into my path. Excuse me, a deep voice said. I looked up. Charles Bennett stood directly in front of me. Up close, his expression was even stranger. His face had gone pale. May I ask you something? He said quietly. Yes, sir. What did you say your name was? Emily, I answered. He repeated it slowly. Emily? Then he leaned slightly closer, studying my eyes. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Do you know who your real mother is? For a moment, I thought I had heard him wrong. I'm sorry. He didn't repeat the question. Instead, he stepped back as if something inside him had just snapped into place. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Excuse me, he said abruptly. Then he walked quickly toward the exit. Across the room, I noticed Linda watching us. Her smile had disappeared. Her fingers were gripping her champagne glass so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Later that night, after the rehearsal dinner ended, I sat alone in the basement, staring at the ceiling. The question echoed in my mind over and over. Do you know who your real mother is? No one had ever asked me something like that before. No one had ever suggested the possibility that the Carters might not be my real family. And yet, the way Charles Bennett looked at me, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. At the time I told myself it was nothing, just a strange moment during a long night. But the next day, at my brother's wedding, Charles Bennett would ask that question again, and the answer would begin to unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. The wedding took place the next afternoon. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom looked like something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings. White roses covered the arch at the front of the room. Rows of gold chairs stretched across the floor, waiting for 200 guests. A string quartet played softly as people took their seats. Daniel stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, smiling like the luckiest man in the world. In the front row sat Harold and Linda Carter, both dressed in elegant formal wear, greeting guests with proud smiles. From the outside, they looked like the perfect parents. And me, I stood near the back of the room with the catering staff, black dress, white apron, a tray of champagne glasses in my hands. Invisible. When the ceremony ended, applause filled the ballroom. Daniel kissed Olivia. Guests cheered. Music swelled. And just like that, the celebration began. The reception was louder, livelier. People laughed, danced, and toasted the newly married couple. I moved quietly through the crowd, refilling glasses and clearing empty plates. Most guests never noticed me, but one person did. Every time I turned around, Charles Bennett was watching. Not casually, not the way someone watches a waiter walking by. He was studying me, carefully, like a man trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, as I passed the Bennett family table, his hand gently caught my wrist. "Excuse me," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was urgency in it. "Yes, sir. You said your name is Emily." "Yes." "Emily Carter." "Yes, sir." He let go of my wrist slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. Then he asked the same question again. "Do you know who your real mother is?" My chest tightened. I live with the Carters," I said carefully. "They've raised me my whole life." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not disbelief, something deeper. Grief. He stood up abruptly. "Excuse me?" he said again. Then he walked toward the terrace doors. Through the glass, I could see him pacing outside, phone pressed tightly to his ear. Inside the ballroom, the party continued. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. But across the room, Linda Carter was watching me. And for the first time in my life, she didn't look annoyed. She looked afraid. Later, the photographer called for family portraits. "Bride and groom's families, please gather near the floral arch." The Bennett family assembled first. Charles stood beside Olivia and her mother, smiling politely for the camera. Then the photographer turned toward the Carters. And the groom's family, Harold and Linda, stepped forward. Daniel wrapped his arm around Olivia. I stayed back near the catering tables. That was where I belonged. The photographer glanced toward me. "What about her?" he asked. "Is she family?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, no one answered. Harold's smile froze. Linda looked down at the floor. Daniel said nothing. Then Charles Bennett's voice broke the silence. "Yes," he said firmly. "She's family." He turned and looked directly at me. "Emily, come stand beside me." My heart began to race. I shouldn't," I said quietly. "You heard me," he replied gently. "Come here." I placed the tray on a nearby table and walked slowly toward the group. Harold's jaw tightened. Linda's face had gone pale, but neither of them said a word. Charles placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Right here," he said softly. The photographer raised his camera. Everyone smiled. The flash went off. When the photographer lowered the camera, Charles stepped closer to him. "May I see the photo?" he asked. The photographer showed him the screen. Charles leaned forward, zooming in. Not on Daniel, not on Olivia, on me. He stared at the image for several seconds. Then he whispered something so quietly, only I could hear. "My God." His eyes filled with tears. Then he pulled out his phone again. I heard fragments of the conversation. "Get the file from 2002. "Yes, I'm certain." The eyes, the jawline. There was a long pause. Then he said something that made my heart stop. "Prepare a DNA kit tonight." I felt someone grab my arm suddenly. Harold Carter. His fingers dug into my sleeve. Outside, he muttered through clenched teeth. He dragged me through a hallway beside the ballroom. The music faded behind us. We stopped near the service entrance. Harold's face was red with anger. "What did you tell him?" he demanded. "Nothing," I said quickly. "He asked about my mother, and I told him I live with you." His eyes narrowed. "Did you tell him anything else?" "Number." Linda appeared beside him, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "What's going on?" she asked. "Bennett keeps asking questions about her," Harold said quietly. Linda turned slowly toward me. Her expression was colder than I had ever seen before. "Emily," she said softly, "you are not to speak with that man again." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you understand?" I nodded, but as they walked away, something strange settled in my chest. For the first time in 24 years, someone had looked at me like I mattered. And I couldn't stop thinking about the words Charles Bennett had said. Prepare a DNA kit. Because if he was right, then the people I had called my family might never have been my family at all. 3 days after the wedding, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was short. "Emily, this is Charles Bennett. The results are ready. Can we meet?" My heart started pounding the moment I read it. For 3 days, I had tried to forget everything he said at the wedding. I went back to my routine, waking up at 5, cooking breakfast, cleaning the house, But something had changed. Every time Harold gave me an order, I found myself wondering, why was he suddenly so nervous at the wedding? Every time Linda looked at me, I noticed the tension in her smile. It was subtle, but it was there. And now this message. The results are ready. That afternoon, I told Linda I needed to pick up cleaning supplies from the store. She barely looked up from her magazine. Be back before dinner, she said. I walked out of the house with shaking hands. Charles Bennett was waiting at a quiet cafe about 10 minutes away. When I arrived, he stood up immediately. His face looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept. Emily, he said gently, thank you for coming. I sat down across from him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he slid a sealed envelope across the table. These are the DNA results. My fingers trembled as I opened it. I didn't understand most of the scientific language, but one line had been highlighted. Probability of maternal relationship, 99.98%. I looked up slowly. Charles Bennett's eyes were filled with emotion. It's you, he said quietly. You're my niece. The words didn't make sense at first. Your niece, I repeated. He nodded. Your real name is Emma Bennett. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I don't understand. Charles reached into his briefcase and pulled out an old photograph. The edges were worn from time. In the picture, a young woman with dark hair held a small baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The baby had bright green eyes exactly like mine. This is my sister Margaret, he said softly. And that baby, his voice faltered, is you. I stared at the photograph. Something stirred deep inside me. A strange feeling, like remembering something I had never actually experienced. 24 years ago, Charles continued, my sister gave birth to a baby girl at a hospital in Boston. Her name was Emma Bennett. He paused. 3 months later, that baby was kidnapped from the hospital nursery. My breath caught. The FBI investigated for years, he said, but they never found her. Charles leaned forward. My sister never stopped looking. Tears filled his eyes. She died believing her daughter was still out there somewhere. The world seemed to tilt around me. You're saying, I'm that baby? Yes, he said. And the people you've been living with, his voice hardened, are not your parents. Before I could respond, he continued. I've already contacted federal investigators. The case has been reopened. My hands tightened around the envelope. Investigators. They believe Harold and Linda Carter may have purchased you through an illegal adoption network. The word purchased hit me like a physical blow. Purchased. Like property. Like an object. Charles looked at me carefully. I know this is overwhelming, he said gently, but there's something else you need to know. What? Before my sister passed away, she created a trust fund for her daughter. He hesitated. If that daughter was ever found. I blinked. What kind of trust fund? Charles met my eyes. Right now, it's worth about $11 million. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $11 million. It felt unreal. But Charles shook his head slightly. This isn't about money, he said firmly. It's about the truth. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. And it's about justice. Later that evening, I returned home. Harold and Linda were waiting in the living room. The moment I walked in, Harold stood up. Where have you been? He demanded. Buying cleaning supplies, I said quietly. His eyes searched my face. You didn't go see Bennett, did you? The question froze me in place. Linda stepped forward slowly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Emily, she said, you haven't been talking to that man, have you? I hesitated, just for a second. But that was enough. Harold's expression darkened immediately. What did you tell him? He snapped. Nothing, I said quickly. I swear. Linda studied my face for a long moment. Then she smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile people use when they realize they're losing control. Well, she said softly, that's good. Because if there was one thing I knew about Linda Carter, it was that she hated losing control. And very soon, she was about to lose everything. 1 week later, Charles Bennett invited the Carter family to his estate in Greenwich. The invitation sounded simple. A private dinner, a chance to discuss a possible business opportunity for Daniel. Harold was thrilled. This is exactly the kind of connection we need, he said proudly, the morning of the meeting. Linda spent 2 hours choosing the perfect outfit. A pale blue designer suit, pearl earrings, hair styled flawlessly. They wanted to impress the Bennets. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Charles Bennett's estate sat behind tall iron gates, surrounded by acres of manicured gardens. The kind of place that looked more like a museum than a home. A long stone driveway curved toward a massive gray mansion with tall white columns. Harold let out a low whistle when we arrived. "This place must be worth $20 million, he muttered. Linda smiled tightly. "Probably more." We were escorted into a large sitting room with high ceilings and antique furniture. Charles Bennett greeted us politely, his expression calm, controlled. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please make yourselves comfortable." Harold sat down confidently in one of the leather chairs. Daniel stood near the window, scrolling through his phone. Linda crossed her legs gracefully on the sofa. I remained near the doorway, just like always, invisible. A housekeeper entered carrying a tray of tea and placed it on the table. Charles waited until everyone had their cups. Then he spoke. "There's something I wanted to discuss before we talk about business." Harold nodded. "Of course." Charles looked toward me. "It's about Emily." Harold laughed lightly. "What about her? She's been with your family for a long time, hasn't she?" Linda answered quickly. "Yes, since she was a baby." Charles tilted his head slightly. "That's interesting." Harold frowned. "Why is that interesting?" Charles reached into a leather folder resting on the table. "Because my attorney searched every adoption record in the state." He placed a document on the coffee table. "There is no legal adoption for Emily Carter." The room went silent. Linda's fingers tightened around her teacup. "That must be some mistake," she said. "Government records get lost all the time." Charles didn't respond. Instead, he placed a second document on the table, a DNA report. Harold's face slowly lost its color. "What is this?" he asked. Charles leaned forward. "That report confirms that Emily is the biological daughter of my late sister, Margaret Bennett." Linda's teacup slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. "That's impossible," Harold snapped. Charles remained calm. 24 years ago, my niece was kidnapped from a hospital nursery." He tapped the second document. "This is the FBI case file." Harold stood up suddenly. "I don't know what kind of accusation you're making, but I won't tolerate." Before he could finish the sentence, the door behind him opened. Two people stepped into the room, a man in a gray suit and a woman holding a badge. "Harold Carter," the man said. Harold froze. "I'm Special Agent Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room went completely still. "We have questions regarding the disappearance of a child in 2002. Linda's breathing became shaky. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. Agent Morrison pulled out a folder. "Our investigation suggests that you and your wife obtained a child through an illegal trafficking network operating in the early 2000s. Harold's voice rose. "That's insane." But the agent continued calmly. "We also have financial records showing a $15,000 cash payment to a broker connected to that network." Daniel looked from his parents to the agents in disbelief. "Dad, what is he talking about?" No one answered. Agent Morrison stepped forward. "Harold Carter, Linda Carter, you are under arrest for suspicion of human trafficking, fraud, and child abuse." Harold tried to step back, but another agent had already entered the room. Within seconds, handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Linda collapsed into the sofa, sobbing. "Emily," she cried, "tell them this is a mistake." Her voice sounded desperate, panicked. "We raised you," she pleaded. "We gave you everything." I looked at her quietly. For 24 years, I had been afraid of this woman. But in that moment, I felt nothing. "You gave me a mattress in a basement," I said calmly. "You gave me rules that made me less than human." Her face crumpled. Harold glared at me with the same hatred I had seen my entire life. But now, he was the one in handcuffs. As the agents led them toward the door, Daniel finally spoke. "Emily, is this true?" I met his eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain, lost. "I don't know everything yet," I said quietly. "But I know one thing." I paused. "My name isn't Emily Carter." The room fell silent again. Then I said the name I had only learned days before. "My name is Emma Bennett." And in that moment, the life I had lived for 24 years finally came to an end. Stories like Emma's are difficult to listen to, not just because of the cruelty she endured, but because situations like this are more common than many people realize. As someone who has spent years studying family trauma and psychological abuse, I can tell you that the most powerful form of control is not always physical. Sometimes it is belief. For 24 years, Emma was taught a single idea, that she was born to serve. When a child hears something like that often enough, it slowly becomes their reality. They stop questioning it. They stop imagining a different life. But the human mind has an incredible ability to heal once the truth is revealed. The moment Emma discovered who she really was, everything changed. Not just her name, not just her future, but the story she told herself about her own worth. And that is something every person deserves to remember. Your past may shape you, but it does not define the rest of your life. If Emma's story moved you in any way, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. Every story shared here has one purpose: to remind people that truth has a way of surfacing, and that justice, even when it takes years, can still arrive. And before you go, I'd like to ask you something. Do you believe people who witness injustice, like Daniel did for so many years, also share responsibility when they choose to stay silent? Let me know what you think in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful conversations begin after the story ends.